That makes good sense. I'm glad you came up now, Ms. Zafar, rather than after. I know you'll be staying up here for the conversation. I'm assuming that you put together the responses to the.
I did.
Yeah, I thought so.
Well, I did with not just me. It's a group of us.
Oh, it was a group effort. Okay.
Everything is a group effort.
Well,
I can tell you I read those.
Well, when I looked through them and the responses, a couple of them just kind of jumped at me. One was the question that we had raised in the background paper that does the CPUC have weaknesses in hazard identification, and how could those gaps be addressed? And the first thing which kind of shocked me a little bit was, first and foremost, hazard identification is a responsibility of the utilities. Well, I guess I would differ with that a little bit, because one, safety is part of your mission statement as a priority, and two, there's the old adage, well, how far did you get with that in the past? I mean, when you look at it, it has not been successful in the past by relying on the utilities to tell us what's going on, or to make it their responsibility. It's equally our responsibility, and I think the PUC's responsibility. So that kind of shocked me, that there wasn't more of a, and then as it moved on, relying on, the CPUC can always improve on hazard identification with more resources. PHMSA conducts audits on the CPUC on an annual basis, focuses on its effectiveness to identify. And so based on PHMSA's last audit, you received a 91%. And I don't think we can count on PHMSA, because, as you know, historically, they have not been the most robust or the most accurate. They're not a model I think we should strive for. So I think that's, it almost, the impression I got was, with using and relying on the PHMSA, is that you're almost passing the buck there and passing the buck to the utilities to be responsible. It's their responsibility. So where is it your responsibility?
Our responsibility is to make sure that the utilities do their jobs. Our resources, the utilities outnumber us 100 to 1 or 50 to 1 as far as resources are concerned. And they're the operators of the system. We are not the operators of the utility system. Our job as a regulator, in my view, is to make sure that the utilities do their jobs. And we need to do a better job of improving our compliance, our enforcement, our prospective look to making sure that the utilities do their jobs. But I wanted to be clear that we are not operators of the system, and that's what I was saying by first and foremost, that hazard identification should always be with the utilities. But we would love to have more inspectors, on-the-field inspectors. Right now, SEDs and inspectors spend more than 85 days a year on the field doing audits and inspections, and we intend to increase that to have at least 50% of their jobs be on-the-field inspection to identify hazards and bring to the commission that type of information that we can then, maybe the Division of Safety Analysis, working in concert with SED's technical folks, and use that detailed micro-level analysis and put it into patterns and put it into testimony, so that we were able to identify larger gaps and we're able to identify hazards within the utility system. But again, with all that said, they're still the operators of the system. They still have hundreds
and I know, and as you mentioned, having more operators and inspectors in the field. But what we learned from the San Bruno explosion and after that, and as we reviewed the documentation and the history before that, is there were some major telltale signs that didn't involve going out and inspecting things. They were just in the submittals that PG&E had made, and the repetitive nature of asking for money one time and spending it on something else, and asking for the same money the next time, and getting the money every time. So I mean, those are the things that don't require going out in the field. They require just paying it, doing the job, I guess.
Absolutely, and that's our job to do, and we need to do a better job of it. And I think the Division of Safety Analysis will bring forth in formal testimony that type of information, so that we could hold the utilities accountable for this. In our view, this division will not only increase the accountability of the utilities, but it will also increase the commissioner's accountability on safety. And the reason I say that is because now the commissioners will have with the Division of Safety Analysis testimony, they will have an opportunity to see the safety perspective on the record as well as the cost perspective on the record. Right now, the proceedings, the formal record is heavily based on a cost perspective in our view. You know, you look at the interveners that come in, they have economists and lawyers. Right. We're looking to have more engineers as part of that testimony. And if our engineers from Division of Safety Analysis put forth testimony, the interveners should hopefully also will need to rebut that testimony and provide a counter testimony, and hopefully they will become safety interveners as well. And that's why we think it's going to increase accountability all around.
I see. Okay.
Thank you, Senator Hill. That's a very good question. I mean, obviously, the balance between we want our employees to own have responsibility for safety, to promote safety, and to ensure that it happens in California. On the other hand, it is the utilities who have the direct operating experience. Right. If you have guidance as to how to do this, I think the Division of Safety Analysis, just by its function of breaking down the silos, will create sort of a joint ownership over the issue of safety, although primary responsibility will have to retain with the operators. If you have suggestions as to how we draft a charter, I'd love to hear that.
Yeah, no, that's very good. And when we have the panel discussion, I think Mr. Joseph may have some suggestions on that too. But what, and then another one of the responses to the question, what measures would be necessary to preserve the independence of a safety intervener? And the response was the safety interveners will have a large measure of independence arising from California's robust civil service system, ethical norms embedded in engineering licensing, and it goes on to some of those other things. And I had to, you know, how did those work in the past? Not very well. So I think we need more than just relying on the civil service system to and the ethical standards of an engineer to make this work.
I wasn't sure where the question was headed, so let me answer it this way. The testimony of the Division of Safety Analysis will not be driven by the commissioners or by the executive director. It will be the engineers of the Division of Safety Analysis working very collaboratively with the Safety and Enforcement Division engineers who have the technical expertise in inspections and audits in putting forth that type of tesmoney on the record. Is that a better answer?
Yeah, no, I mean, that makes more sense. Okay. I think it's important that we not rely on the other. Also,
Senator Hill, one of President Picker's reforms is to create a process whereby no single commissioner can sort of direct staff, that it has to be the body as a whole. Right. So that, you know, to the extent that that's followed, that's an approach that would provide, well, you know, I mean, independence or prevent the tampering by a single commissioner. But it, and in the end, it is the commission as a whole that does set the policy. So I think that would provide a measure of protection.
Okay. And then the final one in here was should the CPUC safety advocacy efforts focus primarily on the rate case, or are there other types of proceedings? And the answer was, and I think rightly so, the Division of Safety Analysis should not simply focus on rate cases. But when you're going outside of the rates, we haven't seen any specificity in terms of how that's going to be done. Outside of just doing it in the rate case. Rate cases are fine, but that's not the only, I mean, we've seen that's not the sole place to identify those hazards or safety problems and conditions that may.
So we have rulemakings and we have infrastructure upgrade applications that are made by the utilities. I think we're going to start with the general rate case simply because the nearest case, the next case that's coming up is PG&E's gas transmission and storage case that they're going to file in November. So we would like, our goal is January 1st, 2017, to be able to participate in that process. But the intention of this division is to intervene in any proceeding that has a safety implication. Can we do that with just 11 staff? I don't think so. We'd like to make sure that we bring value to this and we have the right level of testimony. So we're going to start with general rate cases, especially with PG&E's GTNS gas transmission and storage case. But as we grow and as we show value, we are going to expand into any area that has safety implications.
Okay, very good. Senator Pavley, welcome. Thank you. Would you like to, we're going to excuse this particular panel, and we'll bring the other one, but.
Apologize for coming in late, but I'm not in PG&E territory, but there's something in my district that may be relevant to this discussion, and that's Aliso Canyon and some of the interactions I've had with SoCalGas and PUC. Anyway, I continue to work on that, and it's been complicated because I think you attended one of my hearings, Senator Hill, so that's why I was here, and I'm on budget sub 2, so I wanted to pay a little bit of attention to this issue on hiring someone. Would this person have helped out in a case like Aliso Canyon where SoCal Dogger is doing the wells, PUC has jurisdiction over the reservoir? I mean, it's a very complicated system, and if there's someone to look at the safety risks, I know SoCalGas had testified a couple of years ago about wells that were getting old and problematic. They were trying to make a case for a rate increase. In order to do that, they still should have addressed the problem regardless of your proceedings, correct? But would a safety enforcement advocate, or whatever the title is, be of help in this kind of situation where it's complicated? It's not just the pipelines, right? It's the reservoir.
The short answer, Senator Pavley, and Tim Sullivan, is yes. This proposal was drawn up with Aliso Canyon in mind. Okay. The two major functions of the Division of Safety Analysis would be to raise safety issues in general rate cases and ensure that they're addressed, that they don't just get swept into a generalized settlement. And so in just looking at the last SoCalGas general rate case, where they did mention safety issues, those were not given, I think in retrospect, it's clear to say, that were not given the attention that they deserve. So that is one of the things, that is the principal mission of this Division of Safety Analysis. The other is to push a safety culture within the commission to educate people to safety issues, much as like I was in your district just the other day. We visited the site of the Malibu fire, and we had an en banc on utility poles in downtown Los Angeles. And I must say, I was really surprised by the large number of what appear to be abandoned poles throughout Malibu Canyon. I don't know who owns them, but there's quite a few things.
Apologize for interrupting your hearing or something, but since he brought it up, that's an ongoing issue, especially as AT&T and Verizon are trying to push phasing out of landlines. There doesn't seem to be any requirement that those structures that are no longer in use or needed be taken out, whether it's wires or poles, and they're all over the place. PCH, you name it, and complications during fires.
That issue was heightened at the en banc the day after the Malibu Canyon, although there seemed to be a little bit of tension between people who believe their data sets and people who actually had on-the-ground experience. We had a lot of testimony from members of the Communication Workers of America, and they just brought picture after picture of clearly poles that some which weren't even tied to the earth. They were just poles suspended by other wires.
Yep. So whose responsibility is that for granting the putting up of utility lines or transmission lines of any case in the event that technology changes and they should come down? Who's required, or where along the process does someone address the responsibility of the people that put them up to take them down?
I think we're going to have to get back to you on that. It's a new problem. I don't think we do it. I think we have a broad statutory authority to do all things necessary. And as this becomes necessary, we'll have to have a proceeding and develop a procedure for doing it. I don't know if we need new legislative authority. Let me turn to Amy
Just because the
Yip-Kikugawa.
technology is changing so dramatically.
I think what would happen is that for removal of utility property or equipment that's no longer used and useful, the utility would actually have to come in with an application. So until the application came in before us, we wouldn't really be looking at, the process for removal. I think other things that the commission could consider is whether or not we on our own would be issuing a rulemaking or an investigation. I think it's things that, as Director Sullivan said, we haven't had this before us yet. We need to formulate how it should be approached, whether the utilities come in on their own first, may help us along in that process. But at this point, we need to discuss it and probably get back to you on it.
I don't think there's any incentive for the utilities to spend extra money to take down something they're not using, so they're just abandoning them right and left.
I think you're right, Senator.
We'll find out.
Yep.
Good.
All right, thank you.
Thank you very much for, I think you're staying there, aren't you?
We're staying, yes.
Okay, great. So if I could invite the other panelists, Connie Jackson, city manager, the great city manager of the city of San Bruno, Mark Joseph, counsel for the Coalition of California Utility Employees, Tom Long, legal director of the Utility Reform Network, Joseph Mitchell, PhD, technical consultant for the Mussey Grade Road Alliance, and Marzia Zafar, Director of Policy and Planning Division, and Amy, you're staying there too, that's great. Thank you. California Public Utilities Commission, thank you all very much for coming up and participating. I've looked at the PUC's safety advocate proposal, and it could be a good thing, but I want to be really very clear. I don't think it addresses the problems with safety at the PUC, and that's really why you're here today to talk about this. And I want you to know why I say this. Last week we saw CAL FIRE's investigation report of the Butte fire, and which found that the fire was caused by a tree falling onto a PG&E power line. This was the 7th most destructive fire in California history. It killed 2 and destroyed the homes of 549 families. That's devastating. Last week, a proposed decision came out in the PUC's fire safety ruling. The proposed decision states that the proceeding's ultimate objective is to prevent devastating power line fires like those in October of 2007. And the interesting thing is that since 2007, and you've heard me make this comment before, we have talked about this particular proceeding has gone on for 9 years almost, 8 years. And this is what we get, is this map, which shows the fire hazard map, and the Butte fire is outside of the map. So that devastation that we're talking about is not in the fire hazard area. And, it could be related to the fact that, we're talking in Southern California about wind-generated fires, and that may be why the modeling didn't show and indicate in this particular situation that wind isn't the problem here, because the winds at Butte fire were 4 miles an hour. But there are other hazards, because you have greater tree heights, you've got more taller forests, and other issues that are involved. But that's after 8 years of work. That's what we see. So that's a problem, and that's why we have to get this right this time, because I don't think we want to have another time, and we don't want to see another 600 or 549 families lose their homes and 2 people died. And this is the CPUC's fire hazard map with CAL FIRE's communities at risk in the Butte fire. This is an overlay. And you can see the fire, and you can see all the red dots, which are supposed to indicate the hazard areas for fire.
The red dots are the communities. CAL FIRE.
The red dots are the communities, the communities at risk. The red dots are the communities at risk, and then there's the Butte fire. And the what? Right. So you can see the problem that we're faced with if we want to solve these problems. Okay, So I think that, I propose that the PUC approach wildfire prevention, and this is what we've talked about before, the way that the state of Victoria, Australia, did after a power line fire in 2009 killed 119 people. That proposal is in my Senate Bill 1028. But I'm told by people within the PUC that there isn't the expertise to address power line wildfire safety. So what do we expect this PUC safety advocate to do? And that's the question. Both PG&E and San Diego Gas and Electric rank wildfires as their #1 electric safety risk. Safety division's experts don't know what to do about it. What kind of analysis do we really expect out of this safety advocate? I like that the PUC has made a safety proposal in the budget. I like that it's trying to find ways to get safety to influence decisions where it has not had influence before. I've asked you here today to help the subcommittee and the legislature figure out what the PUC should be doing to channel this enthusiasm that I think we all have effectively to get some results. If a safety advocate office is a way to do it, what should that safety advocate look like? So that's why we're here, and I appreciate this opportunity. And so we'll start with you, Connie, if that's all right.
Great. Thank you very much. It's a great pleasure to be here today representing the city of San Bruno, and in particular, our experience in the wake of the gas transmission line explosion in our town in 2010. And I'm also representing not only our elected officials, but the residents of our community who, as you know, are still walking that very, very long road to recovery. We appreciate the opportunity to speak on this important topic, and we share, Senator Hill, your enthusiasm and that of the CPUC about this new initiative. In particular, we're very pleased to see that the issue of safety is finally taking a firm hold in the PUC's regulatory and, we hope, in its rate-making functions as well. As I'm sure you know, it was our experience in 2010 that prompted our participation in several proceedings before the CPUC, and we continue to believe that it was our participation and advocacy for a priority focus on safety that has assisted in advancing and sharpening the focus on the critical role of safety advocacy that brings us here today. Since the beginning of our participation, the city of San Bruno has established as one of the pillars of its overall program of advocacy post the disaster, advocacy for an independent monitor to be installed to provide independent safety advocacy and to engage in all proceedings of all types, rather, including rate-making, investigative proceedings, and rulemaking, as well as all others where safety of utility operations needs to be understood and represented at the CPUC. Our experience, and sadly that of others since, has demonstrated that the system as it has previously existed, that the regulatory system, has been fatally rigged in favor of the utilities and their interests. While we welcome and applaud the progress that has occurred over the last 5 years on safety as a priority focus, clearly work still needs to be done. Our vision for this function is a fully independent safety advocate whose sole focus and mission is public safety and safe utility operation. We see this advocate as comparable in its operation and its structure and its engagement to that TURN provides in its advocacy for ratepayer interest. That vision includes that the safety intervener be housed in a separate building with a separate staff and having an independent reporting structure. At the same time, we've reviewed and we understand some of the difficulties that your materials and that of the CPUC have outlined, some of the difficulties that have been outlined associated with startup and funding for such an independent safety advocate. Differently than what we understand the CPUC to propose, that this function might ultimately be combined with the Safety and Enforcement Division, we propose that if it's necessary to start up and establish this new function inside of the CPUC, that the objective be simultaneously to work towards the development of external expertise perhaps through an existing or a newly established NGO. In order to support and further independence, a new division within the CPUC should be structured at least similarly to ORA, such that the division director does not report to the executive director, but rather be separately appointed by the governor and confirmed by the legislature. We believe it's necessary to remove barriers to effective communication and interaction between and among engineers and safety experts. And we believe that there need to be deliberate methods to encourage rather than discourage communication between those safety experts. At the same time, we believe that there needs to be a firewall established between internal ratepayer and safety advocates to assure that safety is placed on an equal footing in all proceedings with rate advocacy. Only with a full and deliberate review of all issues can important questions of what is safe enough or what is really safe, along with what is affordable, be adequately vetted, again, on equal footing. Similarly, there needs to be separation from influence by the utilities. As I mentioned before, we believe that the safety advocate should participate, should be encouraged to participate in all types of proceedings, not simply rulemaking or rate making. And lastly, and most importantly, my final points come directly from our experience as a local public agency that we believe, out of urgent necessity, was forced not only to learn a foreign process that was extremely difficult for us as relatively bright public officials to have to learn and understand, but that is nearly completely prohibitively costly for any meaningful engagement by people like us. As I mentioned, the basic procedures of the CPUC are not themselves intuitive, and in many cases, they don't match those of other similar agencies. Regards cost, our city has incurred over $2 million to date simply to participate over the last 5 years in CPUC proceedings. Public information and assistance is critical to the important work of that as the commission becomes more safety focused, and in order for it to be relevant and accessible to the citizens of California that it serves. It's critical that the structure and process to be established include regular and readily understandable reporting to the public. In recent years, and in part following San Bruno's lead, we now see strong interest among other public agencies where public safety problems have occurred to participate, to learn and to participate in these important proceedings. So we also advocate for affirmative outreach to the public to educate, inform, and encourage participation in these proceedings. Again, we believe that this can be best accomplished through a fully independent organization, and we welcome the opportunity to continue to contribute our experience to this important discussion.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Jackson. Appreciate that. Mark Joseph. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members.
And welcome to Connie Leyva, Senator Leyva.